Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You name it, you can find us. You can also find past shows at our website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the nation. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Liu, who's an author, editor, and manager at Enterprising Books. And Mark, you can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So that is Mark
Hello,
Liu.
friends and family.
Great. Mark Liu is a prolific writer with a history of writing screenplays, short stories, and books. He's a member of the South Florida Writers Association, the Gulf Coast Writers Association, and the Southeastern Writers Association. And so the very first thing I typically ask Mark when I meet with somebody on the air is in terms of, as a kid, you grew up where?
I grew up most of my life in Miami, spent some time in New York.
Okay, and when you were growing up as a kid in Miami, do you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, I've been, but the real deal is that my father was a great aficionado of Shakespeare, and I pronounce it that way because that's how he did it. Um, uh, and so English was a passion, but as an engineer, when I said I really want to get involved in English and writing, he says, no, 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 there's no money in that. Um, Not wrong, but um, well, there is money in it. It's just a very hard road. So I kind of set it off to the side to make a living, raise a family, do that type of stuff.
What, as an engineer? That had been your background?
No, I worked in the construction industry as a superintendent, building new buildings uh, for many years.
So
And
what got you back into writing then?
then I started writing. Uh, I don't know. I was in my 40s and I felt like I had enough life experience to have a tale to tell. Um, then, of course, when I got into my 50s, I realized, wow, I knew nothing in my 40s. And and yeah, that's where it began. Um, I wrote a couple of tales that were terrible, but you know, you got to learn the scale before you can play the Beethoven piano concerto. And then I started on my piano concerto about 4 or 5 years ago.
But so you started writing though. What was the first thing you wrote that got published?
Um, the first thing that I wrote that got published was short stories.
Okay, good.
I had I had started with a friend of mine, Hank Eater, um, on screenplays. Uh, and we actually got it to a producer um, who ultimately ended up saying thank you, but no thank you. Um, so, yeah, the first thing that I got published was a short story called Nowhere to Hide in a literary magazine. And that was nominated for a pushcart prize, which I had no idea what a pushcart prize was, but it's apparently something sort of prestigious. I did not win. So yeah,
Now, when was
that
that about?
2021.
Okay, so that's pretty exciting. So that was the first time you ever got published, and it was a literary magazine. Was that it?
Yeah, the literary magazine was called Meet for Tea, the Valley Review. And they publish 4 times a year. And Elizabeth McDuffie, who's the editor of the magazine, nominated me of all the stories that they get, of all the gin joints and all the places, they picked mine. So
Well, very
yeah.
exciting. So for a first story, that's pretty impressive. Now, can I ask you, in terms of that literary magazine, did you get paid for that one?
No, absolutely
Okay.
not.
So the question is now so now you started writing stories and other stuff. Have you gotten paid for any yet?
No, sir.
Okay. So we're looking for our first big thing you're going to be writing, and that's going to be then the great American novel, right? Or are you writing a novel also, or have you finished one?
Novel is the novel is never finished. But yes, it's finished. I've I wrote it. I found huge plot hole in it that I kept trying to figure out how to solve. I've been at this novel for 4 years. And not 6 months ago, I said, I know what the problem is. I had an amazing aha moment. And I went back to it for the 25th time and I fixed it. And then I sent it out to get professionally edited. And that was done. And I said, okay, now I'm ready to rock and roll. And I started querying literary agents. And I mean, I had been doing it before, but now in earnest and with confidence. So, and yeah, then I got somebody who said, send me the full, which after 50 or 60 rejections is a breath of fresh air. Uh, Maybe they're going to take it. Maybe they're not going to take it. Maybe they'll represent me. I don't know.
Well, if not, we can always we can self-publish it, I guess, too, as another option.
Yeah, actually, I had been listening to your podcast. Well, yeah, I guess it's a podcast, video cast.
Right.
With what is her name?
Valley Sharp.
That's the one.
She's the
And
best.
and that sort of kind of inspired me to really contemplate it for the first time. Up until that point, um, I hadn't really considered it. Then the South Florida Writers Association had a publicist as a guest speaker, and this publicist represented Michael Crichton for 16 years.
Okay.
So he's got a track record, and Michael Crichton did the Andromeda
Oh,
Strain,
sure. Yeah.
and he did Jurassic Park, uh, as well as Coma. So anyway, as this gentleman is talking, I'm thinking about Jurassic Park, and it's basically they find uh, dinosaur DNA in a mosquito, and they create dinosaurs. And I realized that my story, while different, because dinosaurs are nowhere in it, is basically about finding something ancient that revolutionizes society. So I'm going, it's the same story. This guy is great. So, wow, I'm going to have a publicist and I'm going to self publish. And, um, and that day was the day. And I promise you, this is not a story. That was the day that I got my first request for this full manuscript from a literary agent. Just when I think I'm going straight down the path, it blows up because, the Almighty has a sense of humor, I suspect.
And so what's the status of it now then?
Um, I am going to wait simply to see if this person is really interested. If not, I have a serious plan B. But if it happens, and Jabberwocky Literary Agency wants to represent me, great. Um, there are distinct advantages to getting published traditionally,
Oh, sure.
and there are things like reviews from reputable sources. You can get, not that I'm planning on it, but you can get on the New York Times bestseller list. You can get reviewed by
Well,
the
we should plan on it. Why not? Let's go for it. You know.
no, you know, from your words to God's ears. From your mouth rather. I I have no issue with it, but at least I have a solid plan B with a because a lot of people go to editors, but then they print the book out and they go, I don't understand why I can't sell more than 30 copies. And the answer is a publicist. I mean, it's what a traditional publishing house does anyway. They look at the book, they make their suggestions, which is really do it or we're not going to publish it, and then the editorial staff, and then they give it to their publicity department, who gets it out to the newspapers, and you start getting reviews.
And there were actually something called their newspapers. They're still around. Newspapers. Can you imagine?
well, yeah. I mean, the New York Times book review is still a thing. Miami Herald, you know,
Well,
even though. Go ahead.
no,
I'm sorry.
even though Mark, you made the big time though, because now you're on Blaine's World. So forgetting New York Times, Miami papers, Blaine's World, man, it's going
I'm
beginning
done.
it. You got it, kid. So anyway, so tell me something else, Mark. I know you through another context, and that is you started something else, I guess, fairly recently, Enterprising Books. Is that it? That's a
Yes, sir.
company you started?
Yes, sir.
And what's
The
that?
idea, the idea behind enterprising books is to get people who, um, from different walks of life. I don't want it just to be about Mark's world because there's Blaine's world, and once you're at that pinnacle, Mark's
Right.
world is
Behind me,
low life.
right.
But um, my specific, there is one genre that I love, which is speculative fiction. Um, but I read other people's works and I try to get them. I offer critique, I offer editing, informal editing. I'm not a professional editor. Um, Suggestions, things like that. I'm trying to create a community of writers who are interested in improving their work and or joining this idea of a movement of writers supporting each other and pushing each other to create um, a diverse powerhouse.
Now,
What a word.
in that, I love that where you describe it, diverse powerhouse. So in that, and I believe I'm part of it now, thanks to you, that anybody can join it, and then you also do writing for it. You're coming out with some interesting stuff as part of that. Is that correct? To get on your
I'm not
mailing list,
exact.
you're sending out information and your thoughts on writing every so often. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. The things that I've learned, I had no idea that filter words exist in writing. Um, if the action in the book is John ran across the lawn to put out the fire with the garden hose, that Mary saw John run across the lawn to put the fire out with the water hose. Um, her seeing it is not relevant to the story, and it pulls the reader away from what is happening in the story. Those are called filter words and filter phrases, and they are in so much writing. And my original version of the novel that I'm currently working on, which is Resurrect or have finished, which is called Resurrecting Eden. Um, there was so much of it, and I had to go back, and it took me 3 weeks to get rid of filter words and phrases in that story. I learned about interiority. What is interiority? Yeah, well, I learned. Um, so this is
Let me
all
stop you. Wait, so what is, now you got me curious. What is it?
interiority is looking beyond. See, it's okay. when something happens in a story and a character that you've created reacts, there should be some inkling as to why they reacted that way. So if you're writing in first person, as an example, that's easy because it's I and me and my thoughts and the way that I process, and this is what happened to me. When you're writing in third person, um, you need to get glimpses into the root cause of the character's motivations. So, um, to give you an example, a woman is just came out of an abusive relationship, and another person innocently says something, and she goes off because she's being very defensive. If you don't know that she's just gone through a really difficult time, you're going to think this character is out of her mind, his mind. I'm not, there's no bias here. So, interiority captures a common thread that we can all relate to about what motivates people. And those are just two of the things that I learned from my editor.
Well, let me ask you this, Mark, because I want to talk about what you learned. So how do you entered writing later in your life. So how did you start learning about all this stuff? Or did you learn it on the internet, or you just started reading everything? How do you become knowledgeable?
Um, well, as I said earlier, English has been one of my passions, but um, the writing industry is different from writing. Um, Writing is knowing some basic rules of relating a story, but the industry and learning that the single most important piece is not your book. The single most important piece is a query letter, which takes a 100,000 word story and pares it down to 250 words so that a literary agent goes, wow, this looks interesting. You've piqued my interest. Let me see more. So after all of that work, and I'm not one to, the only thing I know about brevity is how to spell it. I tend to be very verbose. And that was, so I had to take a class. So I did take classes on the industry. The writing, as I said, has always been uh, passion.
You mentioned took a course. Where'd you take it?
Online.
Okay. And so this over the last couple of years now, you're starting to take online courses as well?
No. What I'm doing these days is I'm getting involved with other, I used to, I've heard over the internet, you need engagement, you need engagement, you need engagement. And I go, I'm married, so engagement's a little late. Um, but I realized one thing, that it isn't engagement, it's involvement. And when you get involved, then you meet people who are like minded, and that is where you get engagement. Um, and that's where you learn, and conversation begins to flow. And I joined all of these writers' organizations, and I go to their meetings. I drove up to Georgia from Miami for a Southeastern Writers Association meeting. I've gone to the West Coast, which is a 2-hour ride from here to Fort Myers, for the Gulf Coast, the South Florida Writers Association, and earlier on, the Florida Writers Association, which is in Orlando. So there is some travel time.
No,
but
do you recommend this to other writers, get to these meetings?
yeah, I think it's imperative. to build an audience, to get inspired for newsletters, to get named. I joined a critique group and I critique their work. They critique my work, and we get better, each of us. And I have no vested interest in their work, and they have no vested interest in mine. Funny thing about the South Florida Writers Association was that they give you writer's prompts. Hey, this is the theme for this month. Write your best story, and we're going to evaluate it. One in poetry, one in prose. And we're going to, announce the winner of the best story. That happened to have been me last month. So
Very
I
exciting.
wrote a story about a young man who puts on his father's army jacket, having found it in a drawer after his father passed. And all of a sudden, he's cast back into the war in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia. And all the things that he never understood about his father, in that one, let's call it a day, he figured out that, again, the interiority of the things that motivated his father. So yeah, on Saturday, I think I'm going to pick up my award.
Now, that story, I'm listening to it. It almost reminds me of the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Yes.
How it just in one day or whole life flashes before him. Are you
Yes.
going to publish the story anywhere, or is it going to be available anywhere?
I sent it to a couple of literary magazines, but the one thing about writing in this day and age is patience is the greatest asset you can have. And so I don't expect to hear back until October, and I sent that out in August. So we'll see.
Talk also, if you would, about your writing. So you're now taking writing obviously seriously. Is this something you do every day for 2 hours a day, or you get up first thing in the morning? How do you write?
I do it every day. Now that I have finished this story, I'm doing the critique of other people's works. We do it in chapter or 2 chapter segments. My friend Hank, that we've spoken about, Hank Eater, had created a story that he just never got around to finishing because his life got complicated. And so he basically created the skeleton and the nervous system. I'm putting in the organs and everything else. So I'm actually co-authoring this book with him. I have another friend who is an aspiring writer who he needed some more basic help. I gave it to him, and now he's off and running and doing his thing. So while I'm not really working on my novel right now, I'm in holding pattern. I write every day.
And when you write, like some people get up, do you get up a certain time in the morning and then just say the first 3 hours in the morning you write, or is it whenever you get to it?
It's after I walk my dog. Okay. I take him to the park, come home, sit down, have my second cup of coffee, start writing.
Now, do you write longhand or with a computer?
No, computer.
Because some people are amazed that, actually write out longhand. But I give them credit for doing so. But can you imagine there was a time when there weren't computers? People, can you believe that?
Yeah, no, what is it? The older generation always says, "You youngins don't know how easy you have it." Yeah,
right.
I can't imagine. And then having written it out longhand, having to type it up. Yeah. So
because my problem is I have the worst handwriting in the world. So I can't even read my own writing, so that's a problem. So I'll usually type anything. Talk about then 2 other things, if you would, Mark. So explain then, so enterprising books, people can sign up for this or is something, a
No,
website?
it's really an association of people that I've met um, through these writers associations. Uh, and you know, there's a motto in a lot of these writers associations: writers helping writers. And my idea for writers helping writers is make their work better without any benefit for me, just for them. I mean, everybody who's a writer struggles. Okay, there are always exceptions. But up and coming writers struggle. And sort of find that there's a community for enterprising books in enterprising books is a uh, sometimes it's just what you need to create that extra little spark that'll jumpstart uh, ideas when you're going through writer's block, that will provide a little bit of encouragement if you're not feeling it anymore. Um, if you're down on yourself, there's a lot of, you know, writing has so much emotional investment that most people who don't do this don't understand. You think you're on top of the world, and then somebody comes along and says, your favorite sentence in that last thing you wrote, get rid of it. It's author's presence. But it's the best. You're not married to it. Get rid of it because it's better. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to write a story, write the best story you can. And enterprising books looks to help people who want to try to write the best story they can.
Do you find that after you've written something, you go back then a month later, 6 months later, a year, and want to change it or revise it? Does that happen?
Yes, sir. The two first stories that I ever wrote, novel length, I look back on an embarrassment. I won't tell you what they were called, and I won't tell you what inspired them, uh, because they're so bad. Uh, this latest, this first serious novel, and that's actually why I wrote it. I said, I want to know if I can write a serious novel. And then, of course, you got to go search for the ideas. And then I get into this debate with my veterinarian of all people, who is a Coptic Christian and very biblically oriented. And we're talking about something, morality one day, and he says, but you know what the Bible says? And I said, actually, no, I don't. I've never really done this. And he says, oh, wait, if you haven't read the Bible, we can't converse anymore. So I started. And I got to Genesis chapter 4, 1 through 14, Cain and Abel awaiting God's judgment because of their offering. And suddenly this book came alive in my head. So discussing morality with my veterinarian brought about a novel that I've been working on for 3.5 years, 24 revisions. And it's only the last one that is the real circle closer, if you will.
Now, what some writers tell me, and I'm curious if you do this, that they're always looking for ideas, coming up with ideas, and they're always writing something. Like, do you have a notepad with you, or do you jot down ideas when you come up with them?
All the time. And you know what's funny? Most of the ideas that come to me are A, in the shower, um, and B, right before I'm falling asleep, in that wake sleep mode. And then, of course, sometimes I jump up out of bed, um, and just jot down some notes and then hate myself because it takes me another 40 minutes to fall asleep.
Well,
But
it reminds me of my problem. I told you is that when I do that, then I can't read what I wrote. So,
No, no,
so
I run to my computer. I
well,
open up the laptop.
me too.
Yeah.
Moving forward, two questions, Mark. So, number one, if people want to track you down or find out more about what you're doing or some of the projects you're doing, is there a best way to reach you?
Um, by all means. Email is m.wordcraft, WORDCRAFT at gmail.com. Um,
Okay, and you're also
there's
you're also on Facebook, right? I think that's how I know you
I'm
from
on
Facebook.
Facebook. I have Mark Lou and Mark Lou Writes, two different. So you can subscribe to my email to my newsletter. And with an email address, you can receive, we can send, we can start conversation, chatting, or you can join the South Florida Writers Association. And we meet once a month in a library down in South Miami, the Pinecrest Library. We'll shake hands, sit down, talk.
Can people do that virtually at all?
Yes, and
Okay.
Zoom.
Because that's how I know that's how I'm affiliated with you, or I met you, I think, through email or
Yes,
whatever.
sir.
So anyway, strong
Your
recommend.
newsletter, actually.
Okay, was that it? Yeah, and I guess we met through Hank or something.
Yes, sir.
Hank there. Anyway, last thing is moving forward, what do you see if we have the show in a year from now or 2 years from now, Mark? Aside from having this one book, one novel published, where do you see what else do you see happening in your world?
Um, I mean, it's all about writing. I'm working on the details of a murder mystery. And as I mentioned before, I'm finishing Indigo Dawn that Hank Eater started. Uh, and of course, we collaborate on it. It's not just I'm filling in all the blanks and to hell with him. Um, I'm not that kind of guy.
Well,
Um,
the key is one last thing I'll share with you, Mark, is that
yes,
I
sir.
heard this from a friend of mine who's a writer, and that he would write, and whoever he get angry with, he'd kill them off. That would be the thing, do them in. So I'm glad you're sharing this with me. So I better stay friendly with you because if I don't want something bad to happen to me, I
Yeah,
don't
no, no,
want
no, no, no. But I'll
it.
I'm not that kind of guy.
Okay, well,
I mean, depends on who you ask.
okay, hopefully not. Anyway, Mark Lou, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World webcast. And hopefully at some
Thank
point in
you.
time we may even meet in person. That'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Or
Absolutely.
have you ever come up to see Hank or North Carolina?
Yes, I have. And I'm planning, we should be done with this collaborative effort October, November. So because I'm a South Floridian, I will probably wait until spring. But certainly by April, we shall have met face to face, shaken hands. And let me tell you, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you.
Well, it's fun, Mark, and like I said, I look forward to seeing you in April. You be well.
Yes, sir.